For me, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is the most exciting thing happening with blockbuster films right now. The idea of a Marvel Cinematic Universe with all these different characters is just a dream come true. And this May, we're finally getting the showdown with Thanos, Avengers Infinity War. In preparation, I started this series called Journey to Marvel's Infinity War. Every Monday, someone recommended I call them Marvel Mondays. I think I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna re-review one film in the MCU in release order leading up to Infinity War. And in the year 2018, there's just the right number of weeks that I'm gonna be able to re-review every single film in the MCU, and then that next weekend, Infinity War comes out. The playlist above features each review in the series that I've recorded thus far. Last week we did Iron Man, next week I'm gonna do Iron Man 2, but the key thing here is I want these to be more than just reviews. They're retrospectives, they're also reviews. They kind of talk about the movie's place in the MCU, but I really want them to be conversation starters. And with that in mind, go ahead and tell me down below, what did you think about The Incredible Hulk? What did you think about it when you initially thought it? How has it held up for you? Have you rewatched it recently? Let's have a nice lively discussion about its place in the MCU. In a lot of ways, The Incredible Hulk feels like the black sheep of the MCU. A lot of people have either forgotten or don't realize that it's actually a part of the MCU, and the confusion isn't entirely unwarranted. So with that in mind, let's start talking about the background of The Incredible Hulk. The Incredible Hulk initially started as a loose sequel to 2003's Hulk, which had been produced by Universal Studios. But in 2006, the rights reverted back to Marvel Studios as Universal did not meet the deadline to have a sequel in production. But Universal still maintained the distribution rights. The eventual director of the film, Louis Leterrier, initially expressed interest in directing Iron Man. But as the studio had hired Jon Favreau for that film, he was offered The Incredible Hulk instead. Initially, he was reluctant to accept as he didn't think he could follow Ang Lee's style in 2003's Hulk, but the studio assured him he did not need to follow Lee's style. The first 3 drafts of the script were written by Zach Penn. Back in 1996, he had written a draft of the previous Hulk film, and 2 scenes from that draft, including the sequence where Bruce jumps from a helicopter, made it into the final film. His intention was to make a film in continuity with the previous Hulk film, but which was tonally different and closer to the comics and the 1970s TV series. In April 2007, Edward Norton was hired to star as Bruce Banner and to rewrite the script in a manner which would further distance the film from its predecessor. He continued to tweak the script all the way into production. Filming took place in summer of 2007. Norton and the director disagreed with Marvel over the runtime. The producers wanted a shorter, more action-based film, but Norton and Leterrier were pushing for a longer, more character-based version of the film, which would have run 20 minutes longer than the released film. In a later interview with Collider.com, Leterrier would state that there was 70 minutes of deleted scenes, including the origin story, a suicide attempt in the Arctic, and a counseling scene between Bruce Banner and Ty Burrell's character. In the middle of the dispute, Deadline published an article chronicling the behind-the-scenes drama and putting both the production and Norton in a negative light. Norton, wanting to save face, gave in and accepted the producer's cut of the film. Prior to release, the film went into arbitration to decide who would receive screenwriting credit, Zach Penn, Edward Norton, or both. In the end, despite Norton rewriting most of the dialogue and adding multiple plot elements, the Writers Guild decided to give full writing credit to Zach Penn. This was likely because the Writing Guild gives more weight to story and character than dialogue, and many of Norton's story and character contributions were left in the editing room. The film was released in 2008, just a month after Iron Man, to positive but mixed reviews. It has the second lowest Rotten Tomatoes score of any Marvel Cinematic Universe film at 67%. And while not a box office disaster, it made significantly less money at the box office than any other film in the franchise. This is one of those movies where we wish we could get that other version of the film because it truly is the director's cut that more accurately represents Norton's script of the film, but looks like we're never going to get it. So with all that said, let's start talking about the good. The best decision that this movie made was to tell the origin story in the opening credits. This opened up the story to just focus on Bruce Banner and his struggle with being the Hulk. It made for a very efficient story in that it's very simply about Bruce trying to find a cure and Thunderbolt Ross chasing him down. Since the story isn't overstuffed, we get a lot of time with both of our villains, both Thunderbolt Ross as well as Tim Roth's Abomination. And while they're not like great villains that we want to see returning back to the MCU in multiple films like Loki, they fit the film really well, and they don't feel like kind of shoehorned in villains like some of the MCU movies have. Like, they're woven into the entire story, they're pivotal, they have character arcs, you see where they're coming from, why they're doing what they're doing, that leads to a climax where there's payoffs and actual emotional stakes. There's also a lot of really nice directorial touches throughout the film. They find ways to visualize the fear and imminence of the danger of the Hulk and Bruce Banner's secret throughout the film. Whether that's like Bruce Banner's fear of his blood getting out there, or the fact that he wears a heart monitor and does breathing exercises throughout the film, they just create little ways to visualize who he is. When the Hulk's not there, you're still afraid of the Hulk, and you know the Hulk could show up as the beeping of his heart rate monitor goes up faster and faster. Those are really nice touches that add to the tension throughout the film. Also, each of the action sequences are handled very nicely. Now, there's only 3 big action sequences in the film, but all of them are long and distinct. They have something about them that makes them memorable. One of them is a foot chase that leads into a factory that's kind of this darkness to it, so you can't really see the Hulk, so it feels kind of like a monster movie. The next one is the Hulk versus military guys and military technology, and that's in broad daylight, so you can see everything in his Hulk glory. And then the last one is the final boss fight with Abomination, and it does all sorts of big boss fight type things where Hulk's putting cars on his hands and there's swinging chains all around. So each one of them is shot in a way where you can see what's happening. It has the right tension, the right sorts of payoffs that you want to have in those scenarios, and they're unique and distinct. Finally, we move on to the cast and the characters, and you've got a great set of actors in this movie, so there's no weak links, there's not that person that stands out with the bad performance, there's no annoying characters or anything like that, just a bunch of solid actors performing solid characters throughout the film. And one more thing I want to talk about, the positives. There's a lot of references back to the 1970s TV show that I grew up watching. The 5 things I noticed, is probably more than these 5, but the first one is during the opening credits, there's a lot of visual similarities and references back to the opening of the 70s TV show. In the beginning, the first act of the film, it shows Bill Bixby on a TV show. He's the actor that played Bruce Banner in that series. Also, Lou Ferrigno, who played the Hulk back in the 70s show, plays a security guard in the film. While Bruce Banner is traveling from South America back to the States, it plays the theme music from that show. And then at the very end of the movie, when we last see Bruce Banner, he gets a little letter in the mail and it says D. Banner on it. Well, in that old 70s show, he went by David Banner as opposed to Bruce Banner. So those are the 5 referenced, or 5 I caught. If you saw any more, go ahead and tell me down below which ones I missed, those little references to it. I enjoyed all those things. With that said, let's move on to the mixed elements of this film. The big thing that could be a mixed element for some people on this one is that it lacks the trademark humor of the MCU. I mean, there's almost no jokes in this movie, and when it does try to do humor in the second half, it just feels off, weird, and out of place. And so it just doesn't have that raw entertainment value that you get in so many MCU movies that are just so funny because they're just throwing joke at you. But some people might take that as a positive because it's a nice change of pace, and every movie doesn't need to be a big comedy. So it's more of a mixed, for me, thing as opposed to a distinct positive or distinct negative. Also, like I talked about with Iron Man, it's another one of those very early MCU films, and so it has less action, and the pacing is a good bit slower than we're used to now. And as I mentioned, the more recent films just feel like joke, action sequence, whereas the older ones kind of took their time a little bit more, spent a little bit more time on each of the characters, the villains got to shine a little bit more. And so that's not necessarily a positive or a negative, but it's different. And if you're used to the new ones and you go back and watch the older ones, they feel quite different from what we're used to these days. And with that said, let's move on to the bad. And I don't really have any big issues with it. There's nothing here that just stands out where I go, oh man, that's the big problem in this movie. There's nothing like that. But on the flip side, while there's nothing that I absolutely hate about this movie, there's nothing that I really love. And that seems to be the big problem here. The cast and characters are all good. They do a good job, but no one is just stellar. There's no one in this movie that you're like, man, no one else could play that person. You feel like, well, these are good actors, so they're doing a good job, but that good actor or that good actor or that good actor could replace them and do just as good of a job because they're also a great actor. There's nothing like magical in the casting like you had with Robert Downey Jr. We just think no one else could do what he's doing. It's just a good cast with good characters. Likewise, there's no amazing sequences in this movie. There's good ones. They're distinct, and I like the action in it, but there's not like some of the best of the MCU in this movie. It's like, oh yeah, the fight with Abomination. That's a good sequence. But there's better Hulk sequences in the Avengers and in Age of Ultron and Thor Ragnarok. And so you have good, but not great. And while the story is well structured and we have solid characters in here, there's nothing really that hits you on a deep emotional level that moves or pulls on the heartstrings. So the end result is a movie that is good. It's a movie that I really like, but there's nothing here that's great. It's just kind of right there, positive movie, positive experience, good, but doesn't go to those upper levels of greatness. And to some extent, I feel like almost every other movie in the MCU has something that's great in it. It might not be as good of a movie, but there's great things in it that just really stand out. And here you just have a good movie where nothing stands out as awful and nothing stands out as amazing. Solid, good movie. So with that said, let's talk about the Incredible Hulk's place in the MCU. And the first thing I want to talk about is Norton and his departure. And that's kind of the thing that really makes this movie feel very off and odd in the MCU is that Edward Norton and Mark Ruffalo feel very different actors. They bring a very different charisma to the screen. They're both likable. They're both charismatic. They're both great actors, but the energy and vibe that they bring is so different that the recasting makes it kind of confusing because it doesn't feel like Mark Ruffalo's Bruce Banner and Hulk are the continuation of this movie. So it gives a kind of a bit of a weird vibe in that. And we know a little bit about what happened behind the scenes, but not really because they've said conflicting statements. So basically back in 2010, Marvel put out a press release stating that they were moving in a different direction and were going to recast the Hulk. And shortly afterward, Edward Norton's publicist put out a statement essentially refuting what Marvel said and saying that different factors were the cause for the switch of the actors. And then as years passed, Edward Norton made conflicting statements saying, no, I just wanted to do some different things. I wanted to diversify my filmography and I didn't want to go back to things I'd already done before. At the end of the day, we don't really know what happened except to say that they went in different directions, which isn't terribly surprising given the way that the Incredible Hulk played out with Norton working on the script and then kind of getting pushed out of the editing room, not getting screenwriting credit. It seems unlikely that he was ever really going to return after all of that happened. But it's really easy to forget that this movie is part of the MCU because none of the main cast in this movie until Civil War reappeared in the MCU at all. And other than Thunderbolt Ross returning later on in Civil War for a little bit and Tony Stark being in the post-credit sequence, it feels like its own thing with its own tone that's totally different. But if you actually look at the plot of the movie, it ties really well into the MCU. At the center of the plot line of it is Thunderbolt Ross and his continued efforts with the Super Soldier program. He is the continuation of the stuff that was going on with Captain America. And so that ties into the Hulk research that's kind of alluded to in the conversations with Tim Roth's character. And then what happens with Tim Roth's character is Thunderbolt Ross trying to turn Tim Roth into some sort of new freakazoid Captain America. And so when that's kind of the plot line of the movie, you can see really easily how it ties in, and it actually adds some nice layers to the mythology of the MCU, especially as we learn later with the stuff going on with Civil War, is his way he ties into different plot lines, all the corruption with S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra. This kind of adds to a nice little piece of it, that one more element of a corrupt government trying to make super soldiers that doesn't have the purity of what was going on with Captain America and the people trying to stop Nazis and things like that. No, they were just corrupt, political, powerful people trying to get power with super soldiers. And you see that in this movie and what happens when you give the super soldier stuff, of course with some other Abomination stuff into it, to a soldier that just wants power as opposed to a Steve Rogers. You get the Abomination who just wants to destroy things and kill people, as opposed to a superhero like Steve Rogers. Also throughout the movie, you hear Thunderbolt Ross references S.H.I.E.L.D. at some different times in the movie. He talks about the S.H.I.E.L.D. databases. They're trying to do some research and track down where Bruce Banner is at. And of course, at the end of the movie, Tony Stark shows up kind of as the Nick Fury in this one, of talking about the S.H.I.E.L.D. and trying to recruit him and that sort of thing in the third act. So you can easily see how this movie ties in. If you just stop and think about it, it fits perfectly in there, except for the fact of the very weird recasting of two actors that are so different from one another that just kind of makes it feel out of place, as well as the lack of humor, and it gives a very different tone. Overall, if I got to score this one, I'm going to give it a very solid B. And that's not a negative. That's not that it did anything wrong. It's just a movie that was just solidly good. And on an entertainment level, it's an 8 out of 10 for me. It's a very enjoyable time for me at the movies, with some great superhero action, with great performances, characters that you enjoy being around. There's not a lot here that really wowed me, but it's a very solid piece of entertainment that I really enjoy rewatching about one time per year. Anyway, that's my take on it. Here's what some of you guys had to say about The Incredible Hulk.
The movie is definitely the black sheep of the MCU. Everything that happens in it doesn't feel like there's much consequence or importance.
This is a really underrated movie. This is actually a pretty good movie.
The final action scene is very video game-esque. Overall, a fun time, but not an incredible time.
The Incredible Hulk, I have to say, is probably the worst film in the MCU for me.
In almost like every superhero movie, they take the hero and then the villain, and they're basically like the same exact thing. Like, I'm not a fan of that, so...
Well, it just wasn't incredible. I mean, it just was boring to me.
This movie is the one movie in the Marvel Universe that is basically forgotten. But this movie isn't all bad.
Incredible Hulk is so different from the rest of the MCU. It's like a Fox Marvel movie. It doesn't look nothing like the rest of the MCU movies.
There's a lot of great things about it. It's not perfect, and not one of the best in MCU, but it's definitely a great film overall.
Now, The Incredible Hulk is a movie that I find to just be okay. And most of the friends that I talk to, they question me even if I tell them that it's canon to the MCU.
But it is very enjoyable. I would say it's a good movie, just not a great movie.
And it's one of Marvel's most underrated movies, but I love it. I think Ed Norton makes for a great Bruce Banner. The action scenes are exciting.
So there you have it. While it can be a little bit of a forgotten film, it's also still got its fans. Hey, if you want to appear in one of my future videos and possibly win a giveaway that I'm doing, learn more about that at this link right above. All you have to do is download the Stardust app and start recording your reactions on there. If you don't know how this works, it's really simple. Download the Stardust app at that link down below. It's totally free in both the Apple and the Android store. Then once you download it, follow me first. My name is on there. Follow me in the app first. Then start recording your reactions to movies and TV shows. And once you do that, tag me. There's a little marker up in the upper right-hand corner. It's like a plus sign. Click on that. Type my name in, tag me in it so it shows up in my thing so I can see your pretty face and your thoughts on different movies, and possibly you can appear in one of my future videos. I'm going to do a giveaway next week when I do the Iron Man review. I'm also going to rank all the Fantastic Four movies, and so I'm going to do a giveaway in that one, and I'm also going to do a giveaway on my Maze Runner ranking that's coming in a couple of weeks. So if you review on their Iron Man 2, any of the Maze Runner movies, or any of the Fantastic Four movies, you are entered to win my giveaway of the digital codes for any of those movies. Anyway, there you have it. If you're new to my channel, please consider clicking that subscribe button. I do movie reviews, TV reviews, ranking videos, re-review, retrospectives like the one you're watching right now. But the key thing is, I don't want to just talk about movies. I want to talk about movies with you. So join me in the comment section, download Stardust so I can see you on Stardust. And thank you so much for watching.